When a mummy book and a daddy book love each other very much. Today I am going to be reviewing the Silverblood Promise by James Logan. We're going to split this up into a little bit of an intro, then plot, world, theme, character, Flea, you'll see what that means if you don't already know, and then my overall rating. So, starting off with a little bit of an introduction. What is the Silverblood Promise actually about? Well, there's a reason I chose the Tainted Cup and the Gentleman Bastards at the start of this video, because it really is a mix of both of these. It follows Luke and Gardova, who has been dismissed from his school. He was once a noble and he's kind of fallen from grace and is now a bit of a ne'er-do-weller. This book doesn't really fit into a neat little subgenre. Is it a mystery? Is it a political fantasy? Is it a heist story? I think that's really one of the strengths of this book, but it's also one of the weaknesses. So let's talk about the plot. This book follows Lucan. He has been expelled from school and had a bit of a falling out with the father, and by a bit of a falling out, I mean a lot of a falling out, and his father has recently been murdered. Lucan finds out about this, and he'd wanted to reconcile with his father at some point, but he's been robbed of that chance by his father's death, and so he heads out to the city of Sophrona to try and solve his father's murder. Now that's how the book starts out, but actually, as I've mentioned, there are quite a few different subgenres in play here, and how that's developed is throughout the story. So you'll think that it's heading down one plot thread, and oh no, we're heading down a different plot thread. Now, I don't necessarily have a problem with this by itself. However, I did find it a little bit jarring in this series. I would have loved a little bit more foreshadowing. That said, within each of these plot threads, I was gripped. I was turning page while I was listening. I was listening to page, and I was excited to hear what happened next. It was a fast-paced and gripping story. Maybe not the most original, however, bringing all of the different elements together in the way that it did was particularly original to me. I also felt a little bit like the end of some of these individual plot threads was a little bit anticlimactic, if I'm totally honest. There was a specific moment where I thought we'd been building and building, and we were about halfway to building, but instead we just stopped and found out what we were trying to find out and then moved on to the next thing, which wasn't ideal, but you know, it's fast-paced, it's fun, and so I would probably give the plot a solid 7.5 out of 10. Moving on to world, and I think this is probably the weakest element for me. It has a soft magic system that you don't really get to engage in, as it's largely not our protagonists who are utilising the magic system. It has these kind of mysterious beings from other worlds that were very reminiscent of Wheel of Time in a way, which I thought were interesting, but again, a little bit generic, and just the general setting felt a little generic. It was very similar to The Lies of Locke, Lamora and to Promise of Blood. It wasn't really giving me anything new. That said, it does fit the story very well, and it works well alongside the plot and the characters to create a book that is overall pretty strong. So while it did serve a purpose, it definitely isn't something that would make you want to recommend the book, if that makes sense. So I'm thinking probably a solid 6 out of 10 for this one. It's not taking away from the story, but it's not really adding anything to it either. Now, theme was actually something that surprised me about this book, because it was pretty strong, I would say. There are lots of themes of inequality, both through Lucan's fall from nobility down the rankings, as well as through watching a noble woman rise from nothing through the rankings, and she is now on the board of trustees or some high council. I can't quite remember, but she's quite high up, and she is fighting for the rights of those lower down. We also have various different groups who are discriminated against because of their background. I thought these were dealt with pretty well, quite frankly. They definitely weren't the point of the book by any means. However, they were interesting, and I think they really added to the book and leveled it up a little bit. So I'd give the themes another solid 7.5, maybe even 8 out of 10. We'll see how I feel when I edit this, deciding what number I put. either here or here. I haven't decided that yet either. And then we have character. This is where this book shone. It's not necessarily stronger than Lies of Locke Lamora, but I would say it really scratches that itch. We have a protagonist who is very entertaining, very witty. He has an interesting backstory, although I would say it's pummeled into you, his backstory, a little bit excessively for my liking. However, watching him grow and develop was very interesting. We have a nice tight cast of characters with 2 major protagonists, as well as 3 or 4, I'd say, side characters, all of whom are very well developed with clear motivations, and then an antagonist who, if I'm honest, was a little bit weaker in the character department. However, we have that brilliant banter between our 2 protagonists that really hit and made this book brilliant. I think that's why you want to read this book. It's for the banter between the main protagonists that just keep this a really entertaining and fun read. So for me, I'd say the characters is probably an 8 as well. Now, I will note that I have an entire section for Flea. Flea is a specific character, one of the 2 protagonists, I would say, and I adore Flea. She is a wonderful character. She's one of these characters who on the surface is very funny, a little bit annoying, but actually when you dig down deeper, there's a lot of depth there, and I just adore characters like that. I think she was brilliantly written. I think she was so interesting to read about. I think she kept the book entertaining. I adored her relationship with Lucan. I will say the banter between them was brilliant. I think having banter between exterior random characters, everyone seemed to be witty in this book, which I found took away from the banter between these 2 a little bit for me, but Flea is a solid 10 out of 10. I adore Flea, and I just thought she was brilliant. I would read this book just for Flea. Everything else, take it or leave it. It was fun, it was nice, but Flea is amazing. So overall, what do I think of this book? Well, in case you couldn't tell, it does draw a lot from other books. Maybe it doesn't draw a lot from them, but it is very similar to a lot of other books. Now, I have really enjoyed these other books. However, I do think that some of them are stronger examples of this concept. That said, if you've not read those other books, then maybe you want to give this a shot. And if you are still waiting for Scott Lynch to release the next Gentle and Bastard books and want something to scratch that itch, then I would definitely jump into this. It's not overly deep, but it has a very fun, fast pacing. If a little jarring at times, I would give this book a solid 8 out of 10. I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend checking it out. Probably not my best work.
3, 6, 5, go. 3, 6, 5, go. 3, 6, 5, go.